because it's not how good you are on day one, it's how good you are day 2, 3, picking yourself up and having that consistency. You're going to learn a huge amount about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm learning a lot today about technology. So I thought it was all going to be about the bike and about getting myself to accomplish this world's first, but I'm learning a lot also about managing multiple seminars on the same summit. So thank you. As I said,
well, it seems to have gone pretty well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I really appreciate you joining me, Mark, because you are a legend in the world of cycling, and I really would love to hear a little bit more about your training and logistics around some of your epic adventures. But first up, where on earth do you get these ideas from, like cycling around the world and top to bottom of certain continents?
My goodness, straight in the deep end. I'm still thinking about what Mark's just been talking about in terms of sort of big picture purpose and the rest of it. So it's we need to segue to now how you pedal around the planet a couple of times, top to bottom, and the rest of it. But no, I really appreciated that chat that's just been before, and I hope everyone else listening enjoyed that. I started out when I was pretty young. I was grew up in the foothills of the Highlands in Scotland, and first hopped on a bike to do an endurance ride when I was 12. So I wanted to cycle from Land's End John O'Groats. I had no idea how far that was or what it would involve, but I'd read about it in the local newspaper and I just thought it sounded ace. So I took it to my parents, and my mum pointed out that I'd never really cycled off the farm before. So, you know, I've got 2 young daughters and they come up with mad plans every day. And at that age, you can either, you know, crush their ideas because you tell them they're unrealistic and daft, or you can say, okay, fine, and you can sort of shake that enthusiasm and take it in a different direction. So, you know, I was a 12-year-old kid who pedaled across Scotland. I was 15 when I got to do that first 1,000-miler from end to end. By the time I was 18, I was pedaling across Europe. When I left university at the age of 22, I cycled around the world. So, you know, there was a clear chronology for me. And you look back, I'm now 30, how old am I? 37. And, you know, I've done expeditions to 130 countries, and I've been out there trying to really push the envelope in terms of ultra endurance and break all these records. But, you know, there weren't baby steps, but it's clear that one thing leads to the next. Like, I can look back and say, oh yeah, that all makes sense. Whereas the way you live your life, like, I never set out to do all this stuff. It was just, you get busy doing one project, and when you finish, the next idea occurs to you.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. So, you know, today I know that you're very well known for cycling these ultra distances, which is why I've reached out to you, because compared to what you've done, maybe Race Across America, 3,100 miles doesn't seem a lot. But to me, it does feel like a 12-year-old asking its parents to cycle from Land's End to John O'Groats. Yeah. How do you prepare for such an epic journey? Because, you know, I've got a full-time job too, and at the moment I'm limited in being able to go out as well.
So, I mean, I think before you get to the specifics of how you train and, you know, the planning of it, it's what you alluded to in the question, like how you visualize that task. So you can never be flippant about RAM. Race Across America is massive. It's the world's biggest endurance bike race. It's non-stop, and it goes from, you know, west to east coast. So, you know, yes, the shortest record I've got is the length of Africa, which is 6,000 miles, but that doesn't make me patronize 3,000 miles. 3,000 miles is still a bloody long way to ride your bike fast. So it's thinking of it in a way which, you know, the classic eat the elephant, you can sort of visualize what you need to do each block of time. Like the block program doesn't scare you. The scale of what you're trying to do, it doesn't matter whether it's 1,000 miles, 3,000 miles, 6,000 miles. As soon as you get into the thousands, you're beyond a distance that you can conceptualize. That is just a very long road. So you need to somehow sort of work at that so it's more within your comfort zone, because until you can truly accept like the scale of what you're taking on, you can't start believing in the micro, the building blocks of the plan. So, you know, what you should be doing is very much bottom-up planning around, you know, what you can do as an athlete, like your average pace, your power output, like, you know, the controllables, the inputs to the plan. The output, the fact that you need to go 3,000 miles and hopefully do it in a decent time, will take care of itself. But that in itself is not something you can target. So, comparative success on RAM might be I want to be placed, or I might want to finish in X amount of time. Those things are not behaviors. Those are things that you will achieve if you have a level of belief in what you're trying to do, and you're very much bottom up in terms of how you're going to achieve it. So far too many expedition athletes get freaked out by the never endingness of that task, be it a 3,000 mile race or whatever. So I always think the best endurance athletes get completely fixated on what they're trying to do. You put that stake in the ground, and you believe in that, you understand, but then you get utterly obsessed with the road that you're riding, the horizon you can see. And the moment, the time that exists between the now and the then can truncate. It's like I always imagine it like an accordion. And whether that's 1,000 miles, 3,000 miles, or 18,000 miles, which is what the round the world is, it doesn't matter. It's just a bloody long road. So the girls and the guys that tend to struggle with endurance are the people who get lost in the middle ground. Like, they've either not anchored the why, like the final goalpost and why that's important, or they've not anchored the where's my head at when I'm actually on the bike. Because if you get lost in the middle ground, you freak out. You just it's just too scary. The never endingness catches up on you. Whereas if you believe in yourself and the road in front of you, then the long term averages will take care of themselves.
Yeah, I think what you've just highlighted to me is that I'm very early days. I've got 2 years to plan, but I am looking at that road rather than, as you said, the two anchors that I could be focusing on. So yeah. With regards to your journey, what steps did you take to actually unearth that purpose or the vision that kept you looking above the horizon of that road?
Well, you need to do things which, inspiration is important, because you have to get the ideas from somewhere. But then, I always say, people come to me every week with their grand ideas to, do things like you're doing, row oceans, climb mountains, cycle the world. And I always say two things, shoot for the stars, but learn your trade. So there's a sense that you can just sort of fall out of bed and wing it. And I think there's a bit of a badge of honor in the adventure endurance world that, I didn't even train for this and I can just do it. That's unlike professional sport, where, your level of commitment and process is very much your credibility. You would never see Andy Murray at the end of a match or a tournament to sort of say, I was just born this way. I can just do this. I just fall out of bed and I can do it. But for some reason, there's still a sense of cool in the adventure world about, I didn't even train for this. I can just do it. And the social media environment sort of cultivates that sort of sense of, you can just do these things. And I am a firm believer in shoot for the stars. I really am. Take on your biggest dreams, but be a student. Genuinely do enough building blocks between the now and the then to give you the peace of mind, the skill set. Not so you're. The thing is, the mindset and the physical awareness to be able to do something like RAM or climb Everest or do any of these things is not something you can learn in a classroom. A coach can't tell you those things. They can tell you, like, they can build a structure for you, and they can tell you like how to manage your time to be in the best shape you can. But the deep rooted belief and understanding and self-awareness to be a good endurance athlete or adventure athlete comes through experiences. You can't just train in the gym and then expect that the experience is going to come on the road. You have to put yourself through the mill. You have to have done things which gives you an understanding of where your comfort is and where your limits are and where your head goes in these places, because no amount of expert can tell you those things. So yeah, you've got the right approach. Shoot for the stars, but learn your trade. And don't like so many people do, feel like you can just smash it on the trainer, become as fast as you can, and stare at your numbers, and then you're going to blitz it across the US. It's like people who go ocean rowing and they spend their entire time on a Concept 2 rowing machine. And trust me, that's not what it takes to row an ocean. You've got to understand the minutiae of the weather, of the electronics on that boat, on the, whatever it is. So it's all the other stuff that you don't think about. Because I think I would say that the familiarity bias that us athletes have got is we focus on training. We just think this is a physical task, and you smash yourself and get yourself into the best physical shape you can. And you do that to your peril, because you sort of ignore the rest of the equation. The things which allow you to be a good endurance and adventure athlete is, yes, being fit, but that is one part of a much bigger puzzle. And I would suggest that a lot of endurance athletes discover only once they're on the race or on the expedition that they should have been focusing on all the other stuff, rather than just, losing weight and getting fast.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up, because earlier in the day I had Mike Griffiths, who was instrumental in helping plan the operations of your race around the world. And he was talking about the logistical side of things that we need to take into account the planning. For my event, because it's interesting, it's a multidisciplined event, because after just 2 months after the race across America, I will be attempting to swim the channel. And something I'm very mindful of is just something you mentioned earlier, is about the weight, about leading up for the race. Is endurance cycling purely for lean athletes, or is it able to carry a bit more weight?
I'm 6'3" and 90 kilos. So if I had a pound for every time somebody met me, they've seen me on the telly or read my books or followed social, and the first thing they say is, "Oh, you're bigger than I thought. You don't look like a cyclist." So I've broken these records and done all these firsts, but I am not Chris Froome. I'm a big rider. If I could catch and throw a ball, I'd be a better rugby player than cyclist. So, I'm a big lad, and I always think having that build, having that strength, is no bad thing when it comes to ultra endurance. There's some real race snakes, especially when it comes to ultra running. But as you pointed out, when it comes to open water swimming or ultra endurance cycling, there's no harm at all. I don't think, you're not going for that. Your power to weight ratio doesn't matter as much. Of course, it's a factor, but you don't need to be, 7% body fat and, smashing out your FTP. You need to, the trick with ultra endurance, whether you're swimming the channel or cycling across America, is not injuring, is not breaking down, is being ruthlessly consistent. And it's like with all these things, it's the hare and the tortoise. Okay, so it's being able to be, put out the same numbers, hour one as you do, day two, whatever it is. The channel is going to be over relatively quickly compared to the race across America, but it's still an incredible feat of endurance. And understanding what that does to your immunology, bouncing back from race across America to make sure your battery is charged right up, you can adapt your muscles, from one to the other. I mean, when I cycled around the planet the second time, when I came back, my lower back and my legs really hurt because I'd not walked for 2.5 months. I rode my bike 16 hours a day for 2.5 months. When I came back, I was a little bit shorter because my back was quite S-shaped from being time trial position for 16 hours a day. And then, I was super fit to ride my bike, but even standing around, it hurt like hell. So, you can be fit, but fit for a purpose. And your challenge will be to adapt from that race, that ride coast to coast, to then open water swimming.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I'm going to build into the planning for the next couple of years in how to make sure my body adapts towards these different disciplines, so that I don't find after the race in America that I'm unable to swim because my hip flexors have shrunk or something.
Yeah, and I think the reality is you will be able to do that. 8 weeks is not a lot of time to adapt between events, but swimming, I always find when I've done a lot of running or cycling, when I first get into the water and do big open water swims, my calves cramp. You're not doing a lot of kick when you're doing open water swimming. Your legs are as much for sort of ballast as they are for kick. My biggest swim is 8 miles, so nothing like the English Channel, but it's still a decent schleck. And I always find that if I'm not accustomed to that, I'm not attuned to it, just that small micro movement, just like if you sit in a kayak after doing a fell run, your lower legs cramp quite badly. So it's getting the legs used to that subtle movement, as opposed to the repetition of running or cycling. That's the thing I would watch out for.
Yeah, very much so. That's very wise. And with regards to the mental preparation for these distances and also the challenges coming up, do you have any tips to focus on the can-do rather than the potential overwhelm that might be looming?
I think, you know, you've got big brush strokes. You know what you're you know what you're trying to do, and you know these are not events you can cram for. So you know what you can focus on is, I say, redefining those big audacious goals, which are outputs, to behaviors and inputs, like really breaking down, not just in the events themselves, but in the planning stage, what you need to do to give yourself the best chance of doing this. So again, a lot of athletes, they just focus on the finishing line of those events, and of course, you know, reaching, you know, the French beach, or you know, the east coast of the US and the Atlantic, you know, these are going to be big moments, but they're not actually what motivate you when you're in the middle of an ultra endurance event. So you know, putting enough challenges in the diary between now and then, you know, even if it's just multi-day over a long weekend, to test yourself, because it's not how good you are on day one, it's how good you are day 2, 3, picking yourself up and having that consistency. You're going to learn a huge amount about yourself. So if you were chatting to Mike earlier, you know, it would all be about the power of the plan. You know, the romantic notion of cycling around the world is you train hard and then you figure out what you're capable of. The harsh reality is we did exactly what we said we were going to do. There was none of this, you know, let's find out in the heat of battle how good we are. We did all the big thinking, all the testing, all the trialing before we turned a single pedal stroke, and then we read it off script. All my KPIs with my team were around time. So I'd be asked every day when I was on the bike, you know, where are you hoping to reach? How far are you hoping to go? And I would say 16 hours. And I was like, where's that? And it's the only thing I can affect. You know, the KPIs that I said to my team, if we faff for 5 minutes every time I get off the bike, that'll add a day to the world record. So let's not actually worried about how fast the bike goes, because that might be because of headwinds or terrain or road quality. Let's just make sure I'm on the bike at 4 o'clock in the morning, not 4:05. Be ruthlessly consistent around the things you can manage, and then you stop worrying about, you know, the scale of the task.
Yeah, it's very true. It's cutting out, it's being more efficient with our time as well as our resources, and cutting out the faff, like double handling almost.
Yeah. And I think it gives you you know, the trick there is it also gives you a way to manage the scale of the challenge. You know, everyone else, I always think with expeditions, there's how you see you and how the world sees you. And the world sees you and it's allowed to go, wow, okay, I can't believe what you're trying to do. And, you know, the scale of it is just so intimidating. But you better not be thinking that way by the time you get to 2022. You better see it from the inside out, just sort of go, well, I know what I need to do each block of time. And the big thing, it'll take care of itself if I'm ruthlessly consistent.
Yeah. How do you see yourself? Just answering that question back to you.
How do I see myself? What do you mean?
When you said the world sees you differently to how you see yourself, how?
Okay, so well, that's an interesting one. I mean, zooming out from the expeditions, if you build success doing things, just to say, if you're successful in business, so in terms of, you know, impact, wealth, whatever you define success as, or you build a profile around what you do, so you become famous or you're on telly, it naturally changes the way people see you. And the more successful you are, the more people's relationship with you is skewed by, you know, those milestones in your career, as opposed to, you know, the person you would just meet in a pub and chat to. So I often think that gets more and more difficult over time. You know, how I see me has not really changed since I was an 18-year-old kid, you know, first leaving home and going across to live in Europe and climbing mountains and cycling. And, you know, we're all utterly human. We've all got the same good days, bad days, mental insecurities, you know, and the way, you know, the lens I see the world is not defined by, you know, Guinness World Records or whatever it is. It's whereas obviously when you meet people sort of say, well, on balance you're very successful at what you do, and I say, well, yeah, absolutely, but you know, I've failed at a quarter of the expeditions I've taken on, and never for a lack of a plan. So I think you've probably heard this, certainly listening to Mark before me and knowing what Mike will have said. You know, I'm very process driven. You know, I'm inspired by the ideas that I take on, but I'm not they're not the things which ultimately define the projects, which is weird to say. Whereas everyone else kind of just sees you for the summit. Everyone else, mountains are the best metaphor for this. Whether you got to the top or not defines the success. Whereas we all know, anyone who's climbed a mountain, that the summit is a moment in time which is halfway there. And it's the best metaphor for how you see yourself on any major project. Getting back to Paris, both times I've cycled around the world, seeing my family and friends, is utterly phenomenal. It's moments that I'll never forget. And nobody else really sees it for much more than that, the record that you achieve. Whereas, when you ride through every sunrise and sunset for 2.5 months, when you're riding 1,000 miles every 4 days, when you're, cycling along with wood bison around you, when you're, sharing these really intimate moments with, your team like Mike Griffiths and Laura Penhall, those are the first things that come to mind when I reflect on these projects. The finish is something that happens when the plan goes well.
Yeah, very wise, very wise. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. I really value your input, and I see some people commenting already that you've been really spot on with regards to the coaching and the preparation. And these are from some other Race Across America finishers and also my coach himself.
Yeah.
I'd love to get your input on some topics and end with some questions, if that's all right with you.
Sure, yeah, 100%. Yeah. Sorry, we've probably gone on too long on some of those questions, but it was interesting.
It's massive gold. I love it. So yeah, and the next person actually on is Hunter Allen. So he's very process driven coach as well. So I'm sure he'll be listening to what you've got to share as well. So the first one is, what one skill do you think leaders need nowadays?
The biggest thing for me is so people are very, I feel, focused on knowledge. And knowledge is something which is important, but we live in a world where knowledge is easier to access than it ever was. What I see in the boardroom, but also on the bike, is a lack of confidence in people backing themselves. So you can have the best ideas. I see this with my kids. They have bright ideas every day. Do they have the gumption to see them through? And I see it, as I say, in business and on the sports projects all the time. We are not short of inspiration. We are not short of great ideas. We're not short of knowledge, but we quite often lack the quiet confidence to if the crowd's going that way, to say, I see an opportunity, and that sort of entrepreneurial spark and that quiet confidence to step out and do things differently. And if I was to pass on anything to my kids, it's the quiet confidence to have the conviction of their own ideas, to make their own mistakes, to go their own way. And that's what we need to see more of. I mean, I said it before and I meant it. Like, I'm 6'3" and 90 kilos. I'm not the world's best bike rider. I've only been successful at what I do because I've formed a habit of having ideas and just going for it when other people haven't. I often think, there must be better people at this than me. Why are other people who are not, smaller, lighter, better trained, the rest of it, smashing this out the park? Because they could, mainly because either they've not had the idea or they've not gone for it. So we don't live in a meritocracy. We don't succeed in life by trying to just get to the top and beat everyone at doing the same thing. Take your talents and take them in your direction, and I think that's in leadership, whether it's in business or in sport, that's the biggest thing for me. Back yourself and have quiet confidence.
Yeah, very powerful. Yeah. And I'm guessing the answer before I ask it, but what do you follow more, logic or intuition?
When I was listening to Mark's answer before, I think I'm a pretty logical person. I think I'm very intuitive when it comes to people and teams around me. I don't know what Mike would say. We've missed the opportunity to ask him. Yeah, I'm very intuitive when it comes to building my team around me and sort of trust and like who to do what and whatnot. But one can't work without the other. It's like asking, it's the nature, nurture, mind, body. These things are so connected, aren't they?
Yeah, very true. They are indeed. And, how do you deal with perceived failure or not achieving goals?
I think if you're not in the habit of taking risks, you're not qualified to answer that question. So I've made a life of sort of firsts and fastest, and by definition, things that have not been done before. So I'm very used to people telling me things aren't possible, not because they're not possible, just because they've not been done before.
Mm.
So failure, you often think if you're, you often think that you're going to be downtrodden, negative, deflated, regretful. You know, I always thought I'd live in regret if I didn't have the gumption to see things through. So that's the assumption if you're not used to taking on risks. You know, it's going to be a negative emotion around failure. And I don't encourage people to go looking for failure, but you know, when I capsized in the middle of the Atlantic, 500 miles offshore, 28 days into rowing, and spent 14 hours paddling around in my boxer shorts trying to survive, you know, I had that very clear thought: I'm going to die.
Mm.
And you know, we lost, and 70 grand uninsured boat. We lost all the footage for the documentary. We nearly lost our lives, but we came back alive. And you know, I learned so much from that project. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but you know, it was one of the most positive trips I've ever done insofar as how I've done things differently going forward. So don't go looking for setbacks, but sometimes you also need to have the courage to leave things where they are. You know, I always thought, I'd say before, if I didn't have the courage to see things through, I'd live in regret. But sometimes I've done and done and done something, and then I failed at it, and I've gone, you know what, I'm not going to try that again. And you know, the emotion that's coupled with that is relief, heartfelt relief. It's wonderful to let an idea go that's consumed you and is just not right. Not because you've not had the courage to try it, but because you've explored it fully. And for whatever reason on that journey, you decided it's not for you. You can't be good at everything. You can't achieve at everything. But if on the journey you figure out you're going to carry on or not, you'll take stuff from that. So you know, I'm not one for regrets, just like Mark, who was speaking before us. But I think I'm pretty pragmatic when it comes to failure and, you know, the part it plays.
Yeah, and it reminded me of something, because about 4 years ago I attempted a world record myself to cycle
Yeah,
non-stop for 24 hours on a static bicycle, and
yeah,
I completed the time but not the distance. So in essence I failed, but I chose not to pursue it again. And as you said, the relief of just knowing that I wasn't attached to that was
yeah.
wonderful. But by quirk of fate, for what I see, no is never a no. It's not a closed door, because what's transpired is my coach has actually built it into my training for this year. So my no has
Mm,
transformed or transmuted into a not yet. So failure to me is only just, you know, a
mm.
perception of an event as well. So
Yeah, I mean, the reality is success and failure is not a binary thing. When you succeed at something, there's elements which you could have done better, and when you fail at something, you're going to learn a ton from it. So you know, we can stop seeing success and failure as you know, as binaries, and just go, well, you know, it's all a process.
yeah, very true. And what keeps you motivated every single day?
That changes, and that's allowed to change. You know, so there's no never ever land. There's no point you get to in your career and you're like, I've made it. So the things that motivated me as a 18, 19-year-old, based on my childhood, are very different than now being a 37-year-old with 2 kids. And, you know, so right now, you know, uh, projects. I love like spending quality time with my daughter. I'm on a project right now with my 6-year-old run and cycle every single street in Edinburgh. And those little projects give me real purpose and quality time with my kids. Um, I've always got projects on the go. You know, and what gets me out of bed is very much, you know, the family and the impact. I think about life in three spheres: work, family, and community. It's easy to create impact in one or two of those spheres, but I think to be happy, you need to think about how, you know, your close family, your work, and community, however you define that, your town, your country, the planet. So, you know, take COVID. You can put your head in the sand and go, oh shit, I need to focus on work, and everything else is just going to have to wait. You're going to suffer mentally. All the arrows are going to be pointing one way, and you're not going to feel a connectedness and a purpose. So I map out each period of time in terms of work, family, and community to make sure that I'm giving thought and something each day to each. Otherwise, it's easy to miss. It's easy to sort of come off the back of one and realize that you're not. and I do these things for very selfish reasons, because my sort of own sort of mental health and happiness is defined by, you know, the connections you have. I always say to people, you know, in those periods where you lose sort of self-worth and motivation, we all have days like that. You just need to get the arrows pointing the other way, because the more self-absorbed you are and the more you're thinking about how things are going wrong, the less perspective you've got. You know, it's the old adage, you know, it's always actually nicer, believe it or not, to give a present than receive it. You know, and you have to be quite grown up and experienced to actually understand what that means. But, you know, as I say, mapping out my life in terms of work, family, and community allows me to, you know, to answer your question, have that purpose every day.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I like that as well. And finally, to everyone listening, what one message would you like to leave us with?
Well, I mean, we've covered a lot in the last half hour, but equally it's flown by. One message. I think I'll flip back to something we said halfway through. You know, if I could encourage everyone to have that sort of quiet confidence, use the massive change that's been forced upon us right now with COVID to create some changes around, you know, how we manage our time. You know, there's some wonderful opportunities, and, you know, I'm not saying that from a moral high ground in terms of I know what I'm doing and this is what you should do. I'm making subtle changes which are making me happy right now, and it's stepping back and realizing how we can manage our time a little bit differently to be, you know, family, community, work, just be a bit more impactful.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate your time as well, for taking out of your schedule to share some
Pleasure
with me. And what is your website for people who would like to keep in touch with you and follow your journey?
It's just my name. So Mark Beaumont online, Mr. Mark Beaumont on social media. It's pretty easy to find me. And yeah, I wish everyone well. Hope they're staying fit and healthy and happy.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you.